They're rarely in the news, yet their influence may be stronger than ever. The Rockefellers, one of the most powerful families in modern history, known for oil, wealth, and control. But how much of that influence still exists today? And more importantly, how does it show itself in ways you might never notice? When we think of power, we often imagine headlines, scandals, or public figures. But what if the real power isn't in what's visible, but in what remains unseen? The Rockefellers are no strangers to this concept. At their peak, they controlled oil, banking, and entire industries. But their influence wasn't just about owning wealth. It was about shaping the world quietly, strategically, and, crucially, long-term. Foundations, trusts, and NGOs, institutions that are often seen as philanthropic, neutral, or even progressive, can also serve as mechanisms of influence. By funding research, universities, and global initiatives, the decisions made in secret boardrooms can ripple through entire societies without a single headline. Today the question is, do they still pull political strings? Consider this: think tanks, policy institutes, and global advisory boards often shape legislation, international agreements, and even public opinion. And the Rockefellers, they helped fund many of these organizations from the very beginning. From climate policy to banking regulations to global health initiatives, their fingerprints can be subtle, almost invisible. And that's the point. Influence doesn't always need a signature. In fact, the less you see, the stronger it can be. But here's the key question: how much of today's political landscape is shaped by invisible hands, and how much is simply perception? Separating fact from myth becomes essential. It's often assumed that oil dynasties would fight environmental reforms, but history tells a more complex story. Through foundations and NGOs, the Rockefellers were early backers of environmental research. In the 20th century, they funded studies that led to the modern conservation movement. Some argue this was a form of influence, shaping the conversation on energy, climate, and sustainability, while maintaining strategic control over industries in transition. Today, funding green initiatives can appear altruistic, but it also positions decision-makers at the forefront of a global agenda. Influence, after all, thrives where public perception meets private control. The power of think tanks is often underestimated. They write reports, advise governments, and train the next generation of leaders. And some of the biggest names in global policy, like the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission, well, they've got connections to Rockefeller funding. Imagine shaping a report on global economics or public health, and knowing it'll influence politicians, CEOs, and media outlets, all without ever appearing in the spotlight. That's modern influence. It's quiet, methodical, and, honestly, profoundly effective. NGOs, universities, and even some media outlets, all of these channels can carry subtle imprints of private influence. And the Rockefellers, they've historically understood this better than almost anyone. Silence is powerful. Absence from headlines does not mean absence from influence. In fact, it can amplify it. By avoiding the glare of publicity, decisions can be made, networks strengthened, and strategies executed, without the scrutiny of public opinion. And the Rockefeller approach has always leveraged this principle. Their philanthropic image, a family that gives to medicine, education, and the arts, may also serve a dual purpose. Reputation is a shield, visibility is selective. And the true measure of influence? Often it's what you don't see. Of course, where there is power, myths follow. Conspiracy theories claim total control, secret governments, even manipulation of world events. But reality is more nuanced, and sometimes more fascinating. The Rockefellers don't need to orchestrate every global event. Their strategy has always been one of leverage funding, networking, and quietly shaping systems. Influence doesn't require omnipotence. It requires persistence, planning, and patience. By understanding how influence can be subtle, through foundations, think tanks, and NGOs, we can separate what is factually verifiable from what is exaggerated. And in doing so, we start to see the real legacy of one of history's most powerful families. So, are the Rockefellers still pulling strings today? The answer isn't simple. They may not dominate headlines like they once did, but through institutions, philanthropy, and strategic investments, their influence persists, quietly shaping politics, economics, and even environmental policy. And here's the uncomfortable truth. In a world where information is constant, but context is scarce, those who operate in the shadows may wield more power than ever. The question isn't just whether they're still pulling strings, but whether we notice the strings being pulled at all. Power doesn't always announce itself, influence doesn't always make the news, and history often repeats itself quietly. Next time you hear of a think tank report, a global initiative, or a policy shift, ask yourself, who's shaping the world behind the curtain? The Rockefellers, maybe, just maybe, are still there, pulling the strings.